Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer where we're going to completely master topic 3.1.4 break-even analysis. Look, if you're studying business, wrapping your head around financial management decisions isn't just a good idea, it's absolutely non-negotiable. Today, we're going on a masterclass journey, starting from the basic foundational formulas and building all the way up to strategic, big-picture evaluation. Break-even analysis is basically the survival toolkit for any business, telling them exactly what it takes to just stay afloat. So, let's dive right in.
Here is our agenda for today. We'll be covering 1. Basics of contribution analysis. 2. Calculating break-even output. 3. Analyzing break-even charts. 4. The impact of changes. And finally, 5. Strategic utility and evaluation.
All right, let's kick things off with section 1, Basics of Contribution Analysis. Okay, before we can figure out when a business breaks even, we have to understand exactly what money is actually going out the door. Total costs are split into two main camps, fixed and variable. Fixed costs, well, they stay exactly the same no matter what you do. Think about your rent, your insurance, salaries. You pay those whether you sell 0 units or 10,000. But your variable costs, those scale directly with your output. Things like raw materials or packaging. The more you make, the more you pay. Simple, right?
Now here's where it gets interesting. Contribution per unit is literally exactly what it sounds like. It's the money from a single cell that contributes, first towards paying off that stubborn mountain of fixed costs, and then eventually towards your profit. The formula is beautifully simple. It's just your selling price minus your variable costs per unit. So if you sell a product for 10 pounds and the raw materials cost you 4 pounds, you've got 6 pounds left over. That 6 pounds, that's your contribution.
So what about your total contribution? It's just a quick two-step process to scale up that per unit number across everything you sell. You can actually calculate this in two different ways. You can either multiply your contribution per unit by the total number of units sold, or you can just take your total revenue and subtract your total variable costs. Either way, you're figuring out the total chunk of cash your sales are generating to chip away at those fixed costs. Moving right along to section 2, calculating break-even output. So how do we find that magical survival point? You just divide your total fixed costs by your contribution per unit. Let's think about it logically. You've got this massive mountain of fixed costs to pay off, right? And every single item you sell hands you a small shovelful of cash. That's your contribution per unit. Break-even output is just asking, how many shovels does it take to level the mountain? It's the exact number of sales you need, so you aren't making a loss, but you're not quite making a profit yet either.
Yup, 0. At the break-even point, your profit is exactly 0. Every single penny of your fixed and variable costs has been covered. Now, I know 0 doesn't sound super exciting, but in business planning, hitting 0 is a massive milestone. It means your total revenue has finally caught up to your total costs. You're surviving. But businesses don't just want to survive. They want breathing room. That's your margin of safety. To find it, you literally just take your actual sales and subtract that break-even output we just calculated. So if your break-even is 100 units, but you're actually selling 150, your margin of safety is 50. That means your sales can drop by 50 units before you start bleeding money again. It's your safety net.
Let's actually put this into practice. We've got some simulated business data here for a project called Finley's Farm Glamping. Take a look at these numbers. They're charging a selling price of 100 pounds per unit. Their variable costs are 40 pounds per unit. Their total fixed costs are sitting at 12,000 pounds, and their actual output is 250 units. All right, it is your turn to do the math. Using the data we just looked at for Finley's Farm, I want you to work out the contribution per unit first, use that to find the break-even output, and finally determine their margin of safety. Go ahead, grab a calculator, pause the video now, and complete task 2. Welcome back. Let's move to section 3, Analyzing break-even charts. Numbers are great and all, but mapping this out visually makes everything instantly click. On a break-even chart, there are a few key players. Notice the fixed cost line? It's perfectly horizontal because, well, it never changes. Then you have your total cost line, which starts right at the fixed cost mark, because even at 0 output, remember, you still have to pay rent. Total revenue, on the other hand, starts at absolute 0. The absolute magic happens right where that revenue line climbs high enough to cross the total cost line. That intersection is your break-even point. Anything to the left is the danger zone, the loss zone. But everything to the right, that is pure profit.
Now, let's look at section 4, the impact of changes. Because let's be real, in the actual business world, costs and prices absolutely never stay still. So what happens to our chart? Well, if you increase your selling price, your contribution per unit gets bigger, right? You're essentially taking much bigger shovels to that mountain of fixed costs. So, naturally, you need fewer sales to break even, and your break-even point shifts to the left. On the flip side, if your variable or fixed costs suddenly shoot up, you're going to have to sell a whole lot more just to survive, pushing your break-even output way to the right.
So I want you to think about the domino effect here. Let's say a business experiences a sudden increase in fixed costs. Specifically, their rent goes up. I want you to carefully trace that out. Rent goes up, so what exactly happens to the fixed cost line? What does that do to the total cost line? And ultimately, how does that shift affect the intersection point and the business's safety buffer?
Let's test those analytical skills. I want you to build a logical chain of reasoning, connecting that initial rent increase all the way through to the final impact on the margin of safety. Get your thoughts organized, pause the video now, and complete task 1.
All right, time for our final section, Section 5, Strategic Utility and Evaluation.
We've seen how the math works, but we really have to ask, is this actually a reliable tool for a manager making high-stakes decisions? Well, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, break-even analysis is incredibly valuable. It sets clear targets and lets you play out what-if scenarios. But it has some massive limitations. It assumes you live in a perfect world where prices never change. It assumes every single item you produce gets sold immediately, no leftover inventory, no desperate clearance sales. And it assumes costs scale in a perfectly straight line, completely ignoring things like bulk discounts or economies of scale.
Think about how these limitations play out in real life. What if a business is in a highly dynamic, unpredictable market? Imagine a tech startup or a fashion brand facing sudden spikes in material costs or wildly shifting consumer demand. If they rely strictly on a static break-even chart drawn up 6 months ago, they might be making some incredibly risky, out-of-touch decisions. It's time to put on your consultant hat. Weigh the undeniable value of having a quantifiable financial target against the harsh reality of a model that basically ignores market chaos. Form a clear judgment on how reliable this tool really is. Go ahead, pause the video now and complete task 3. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. In a market that is constantly shifting and evolving, should a business treat its break-even point as absolute, undeniable truth, or is it simply a rough compass, a starting guide for survival? Numbers give us a fantastic, solid foundation, sure, but true business strategy? That requires you to look up from the spreadsheet and actually navigate the messy uncertainty of the real world. Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into break-even analysis, and keep asking those tough, critical questions.